Should legislation be passed that would require a business to give a 2-year notice before closing its doors? Richard McKenzie, Clemson University professor of economics, talks today about this law and others pertaining to fugitive businesses. Ball State concert pianist Pia Sebastiani performs Chopin, and jazz great James Moody plays some of his Moody magic on his saxophone. Congress is debating a law that would prevent businesses from leaving established areas, moving to different locales or out of the country. It's called the Fugitive Business Law. Richard McKenzie, Clemson University economist, talks with us about the law. Mr. McKenzie, what is a fugitive industry? Isn't that rather a harsh terminology?
Well, it is kind of vague, but basically what I'm going to be dealing with in my talk, and what I deal with in writing about fugitive industry, are plants that close down and want to relocate elsewhere, or just close down and go out of business altogether. The most interesting issue that is developed in these political discussions are those plants that close down up north and move south, or for that matter, plants that close down in the south or the north and move to Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, Bangladesh, and elsewhere in the country. So the real concern is the movement of industry, the mobility of capital, and perhaps the view that we may be losing jobs, and high-paying jobs, and the consequences of that. There is a great deal of concern that the loss of the industrial base in this country is generating what has been referred to as a polarized society. A lot of high-income earners, a lot of low-income earners, and there's a big missing middle there. In much of my work, I've been trying to show how many of these arguments are misguided and misdirected, and certainly the legislative remedies that have been offered would make the problems worse, especially for the northern states that are having a tough time trying to attract industry or to retain the industrial base that they have.
What about federal regulation for business and industry? Hasn't worked, and some of it has. Do you think that we should legislate decision matters such as whether an industry can close its doors, go out of business? I thought this was a basic American right.
Well, it has been a basic American right, but it seems to be that Congress perceives itself in its position as taking away basic American rights from time to time. I certainly think that the legislative agenda is misguided and will hurt the very people that they want to help. Now, the legislative agenda that has been proposed for the past 14 years now would require plants to give notice of their closing, up to 2 years of notice, provide up to 1 or maybe even 2 years of severance pay to workers, depending upon their tenure of work, and also provide extended benefits, for example, health insurance, life insurance, and in the event that they might close, there would be all kinds of penalties that might be leveled on a firm that would close and relocate to the south, and perhaps an even greater penalty if they located abroad. I think that's misguided. And this is not because I'm making a pro-industry argument or that I'm somehow anti-labor. It's that I think those types of remedies will actually hurt labor, especially in this country, because closing requirements, severance pay requirements, extended benefits requirement just increase the cost of using labor in this country. It's like imposing a tax on every worker that is hired. If you hire more workers, the cost that you're going to incur in the event that you have to close goes down. So you should anticipate an increase in the cost of doing business, a reduction in investment, and as a consequence, a failure of jobs to be created. And I've argued for several years now that restrictions on the ability of plants to close end up as a restriction on plant openings. And this can feed back into the demand for labor and actually reduce the wages of workers. They may get closing benefits, but they're going to get lower wages in the process. And I point out that workers have the option now of getting closing benefits if they want them. All they've got to do is recommend to management that they're willing to pay the cost of getting a guaranteed severance pay of a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years, or notification of plant closings or extended health and insurance benefits. They can get those. All they've got to do is alert their managers, their owners, to the fact that they're willing to take the pay cut that would be required to finance such benefits. By virtue of the fact that they do not negotiate in any to any great extent those type of benefits, it suggests that an imposition of closing benefits would make workers worse off. It would require them to take benefits and to give up wages to an extent that they would not have freely chosen to negotiate those bargains.
I could see where workers possibly could be compensated for a plant that moves to another country, or another location. But usually when they move to another location, most of them, do they not offer job transfer opportunities for their people?
Some of them do not. I would say it's probably a minority of firms that relocate and offer transfers. Some of the bigger ones do, but many of the firms that relocate are simply relocating to take advantage of another labor market where the wages or productivity, the wages are lower or the productivity is higher. So they don't want their workers to follow them.
I could see in those cases where workers should be compensated. But how can a company that is going out of business, and 99% of the companies that go out of business do so for economic reasons, they're just not making it, right?
I would say that that's the predominant view.
Well, how can they get 2 years notice and say 2 years severance pay?
Well, sometimes they put escape clauses in these proposed legislation that account for the firms that go out of business. But of course, once you introduce those escape clauses, management will try to ensure that when in fact they do close down, that they can believe that they are that they're going to go out of business. The other thing about the notification, it might force some firms to actually go out of business that would not otherwise have to. At almost any point in time, there are firms in Indiana that are contemplating failure. That is, they may have to go out. If business doesn't pick up in the next 2 or 3 months, they're going to have to close down. They don't know whether they're going to be able to make it through. If, in fact, you have a law that requires them to give notice or to pay severance pay after they have closed, you have a law that's going to induce some of these firms that don't know whether or not they're going to make it to go ahead and give notice that they are in fact going to close, and as a consequence we might anticipate some of their employees, key employees, leaving. You might anticipate banks being reluctant to provide them credit, parts suppliers to be reluctant to supply them parts. And as a consequence, these firms might seal their fate by abiding by the law. And some of these firms, by the sheer probabilities of it, are going to be able to make it through.
Just doesn't make sense, a company operating without funds for 2 years because the government requires the notice. That's
right. And another thing that people don't understand is that some firms are going to that might have to incur these costs because a particular plant is closing down. Those costs might bankrupt the entire company. For example, Firestone in Dayton closed down a plant of 1,800 workers. If they had had to give a 2 years notice plus a year of severance pay, it could very well have bankrupted the entire Firestone company. And as a result, jeopardized the tens of thousands of jobs of other Firestone workers around the country.
One final question. Is the problem of fugitive industries widespread?
No. Studies reveal that most industries that close and relocate stay within the county, and then it's a very, very small percentage
within
of
the country or
within the county.
Within the county.
And then you have a very, very small percentage of firms that are moving outside the state, and an even smaller percentage that are moving from, say, the Frost Belt to the Sun Belt. To give you a grand example, most people think that South Carolina is prospering because of all those northern firms that are moving in. We did a study of firm relocations into to South Carolina during the 1970s. We tallied up the number that came in, and in 1980 we asked what percentage of these firms that moved into the state during the 1970s and had employment of more than 500 workers in 1980. What percentage of the labor force does it represent? Those firms represented 7/10 of 1% of the labor force of South Carolina. Much of the industrial growth in South Carolina is indigenous to the area. Much of the growth in the South is indigenous to the South. Very little of the job losses in the North is due to the fact that firms are relocating from the northern industrial tier to the west or to the south. If you begin to look at it that way, it's not the South robbing the North. And indeed, you've got to understand that if we try to prevent northern firms from moving into the South, what you're going to do is you're going to leave all kinds of profitable opportunities available in the South for Southerners to exploit to the benefit of the Southerners and not to the Northerners. And as a consequence, they're going to take advantage of those more cost-effective areas of production. They're going to go into business, and they're going to undercut the northern firms that could not move. And they'll dominate the employment area anyway, regardless of whether your firms move.
So in essence, the firm, it's not a serious problem, but the firms that do move are the ones that get the most publicity.
It is not a serious problem. There has been a great deal of mythology that has grown up. The country is not deindustrializing. The industrial production index is reaching an all-time peak. Industrial production, goods production as a percentage of gross national product is at the same level it was 30 or 40 years ago. There is some serious question as to whether or not we're moving into a service economy. The whole argument for trying to protect American workers against the mobility of capital is just fraught with misconceptions about what's happening in the real world.
Richard McKenzie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pia Sebastiani, Ball State University School of Music professor of musical performance and internationally known concert pianist, plays Fireworks Prelude No. 24 by Claude Debussy. jazz saxophonist James Moody, known for his hit song, Moody's Mood of Love. Performed at Ball State with 3 jazz ensembles, and he also conducted seminars. Between performances, he talked with us about his philosophy of life and his music. Mr. Moody, in talking to the Ball State music students, you had quite a philosophy about life, your life, and a lot of good suggestions about how they could conduct their life. Tell us about your philosophy, about living and relating to people like you did to the students.
Well, my philosophy varies from the standpoint that it depends on what the situation calls for as to how I would, what kind of philosophy I would interject. Because I just came back from Australia, I was in China, I was in the Philippines, and I was in Japan. And in each one of those countries, the cultures are different. Consequently, like one thing that would seem to be right for one country would be wrong and misinterpreted in another country. For instance, say, go to Italy. I was in Italy not long ago. In Italy, like if you make eye contact with a person, you're talking to them, eye contact is known supposedly to be an act of sincerity, like you're being sincere. Whereas in Japan, you don't make eye contact. You see, like you avoid that because that's not considered good manner to make eye contact. You see, just the way it is. So when I get to the philosophy that I say that I'm going to use, it boils down to the thing whereby you say, you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, according to whatever they think is right. You see? Because you can be in a different country, and that saying that we have here, it works to a certain degree, then it changes as you go from country to country.
As a man who's seen a great deal of life, you've lived a lot in your 61 years, you advise the students about the misuse of alcohol and drugs and so forth, and to live a good life. And this was important coming from you as an important figure in the music world, probably one of the great jazz players. And I noticed it made an impression on them. What were some of the comments you had to say about the use of drugs and alcohol?
Well, first of all, alcohol itself per se can be misused. If a person has a cocktail or something when they're at their leisure time, I can see that. But what happens is, like, people have a tendency to overindulge. And that comes because alcohol is habit forming. Like, it can become addictive. Drug can become addictive. Cigarettes can become addictive, but cigarettes don't do anything for you, nothing except to kill you. They give you cancer, heart disease, emphysema. So the best thing to do is don't smoke at all, because when you see these ads in the paper about smoking, they always have the ads in there about the automobile, the pretty girl and the handsome guy with a cigarette, and the cigarette is helping them to have a beautiful time. And what else they said? They said they have the cigarettes, the alcohol, the automobile, and sex. And when kids see that, they go out and they do all of them, all 4. And let's face it, the only thing in there that is worthwhile is the automobile and the sex when you become of age, knowing what to do and how to do and when you become married. You know what I'm saying?
When you send a message to the students from someone as important as you, it has an impact. Let's talk about your music and your contribution to jazz. What changes have you seen in the first? When did you start? When was your first gig?
My first gig
as a term they use in the music?
as a professional,
Yes.
I guess maybe when I played at a place in Newark, New Jersey, at a bar called Lloyd Manor, Lloyd Bar and Grill. I played there on weekends. I made $7 a night.
That was how long ago?
1947.
47. What are the changes that you've seen in jazz in the period that you've been in music?
Well, the music, the younger musician of today is much more knowledgeable than the younger musician was when I was coming up. A musician of 21 now, I mean, knows much, much, much more music than a musician of 21 back there when I was coming up.
All right, who were the greats when you were coming up?
When I was coming up with Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie.
Did you have a chance to work or talk with any of those people? Did they help you as a young musician?
No, I went in the Air Force. I went in the Air Force when I was 18 years old. And I didn't meet Dizzy Gillespie until I was about 19, 20, 21, about almost 21 years old when he came down to the base, the Air Force base where I was stationed in Greensboro. That's when I met Dizzy. And then I didn't meet Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young or Charlie Parker. I didn't meet them until I joined Dizzy's band in the latter part of 1947 on 52nd Street in New York City.
Were the older established musicians helpful to you? Did they help young musicians?
In their way, they did. In their way, see, because the styles have changed. A lot of times before, the older musicians, if they had some of them, they would have a prize. In those days, they call them licks. And if they had a prize lick, they wouldn't show it to you. They'd show you something, but they wouldn't show you everything, you know. But nowadays, the kids, like, they're glad to hand you something if they know it, you know. Or if you, like, if I know something and if you ask me what it is, I'm glad to show it to you. If I can, I'll show you, you know. So things have changed. I remember one musician that I said, hey, show me that saxophone player. And he turned his back and played it. I said, but show me, I can't get it. He turned his back and played it. I said, one more time. He said, that's enough, you know.
Students today seem to get more help. People like yourself and Dizzy Gillespie come to campuses like Ball State.
Right, right.
Talk to students, show them how they play and how to play and so forth. Are the opportunities greater for the musician today? Is it easier to get in and become established?
You know something I have to say? In those days also, I didn't know what it was I had to learn. I had no idea. Nowadays, like, I can ask Dizzy's things because I understand some of the things that he's doing now. And I can say, hey, Diz, what about this here? And Dizzy will show me. He'll say, oh, Moody, check this out, or look at this. Because Dizzy is very advanced, and people still don't know that. I was saying that today in the class. He has some very involved musical things going on. But
Really?
you were saying, is it easier now to get
Yes, to become established.
Well, I have to put it this way. Being that I am of the age that I am, I don't think I would be able to give any answer to that, mainly because I am one of the old timers. I'm one of the last of them. Like, that would give me a little place toward being established anyway.
No, I mean the younger students, like the students that studying under
You mean would it
Paluzzo.
be easy for them to become established?
Right.
No, they would have to do the same thing that we did. Like, we paid our dues. Every musician that we know, every one that I knew, they did something. They all drank or something happened. I mean, we all had problems. We all had, I mean, different things happened to us. And so what will happen is the younger musician will have his ups and downs, but they won't necessarily be the same, but it's called paying dues. And I don't care what you do, you've got to pay your dues. Nobody puts the silver spoon in your mouth for you.
Bottom line is hard work.
Well, the bottom line, the bottom line is work, period.
Good.
Work.
Would you show us a little of that Moody magic? Would you mind playing something for us, just a bit, for our audience?